Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Anthony Fauci was on a CBS interview recently that I'm going to play for you. And he pretty much gave us that forget about the past and push your skepticism aside, and black community need to go get the COVID shot. We're not going to forget about no past. We're not going to forget about the disparities that's in healthcare, not even among the adults, but among black children too. Even black children don't get the same level of healthcare that white children get. And we don't get the same treatment. And y'all use AI, and AI is racist. If the person that programmed it is racist, it's racist. And that's also used in the medical industry. And it has been proven that there are all kinds of racial disparities in the treatment that black people get and white people get in the medical field. And ladies and gentlemen, we never forget our past. You're never going to forget the Tuskegee experiment, the forced sterilizations done on black women, and all of the bad treatment. Remember, we were their lab rats in every university around this country. They dissected us. So, no, we are not going to forget a damn thing. And you can take that vaccine and shove it. You go take it. Give it to your people. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to play this interview for you. And, you know, Dr. Fauci, we don't have to do anything to make you feel better or anybody like you feel better. You know, we have heard this forget the past sermon forever. And I'm just telling you, it ain't going to happen ever. All right, let me go ahead and play this interview for y'all.
I'm going to introduce Dr. Anthony S. Fauci for our audience. Dr. Anthony S. Fauci is director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the U.S. National Institutes of Health, where he oversees an extensive research portfolio focused on infectious and immune-mediated diseases. As the longtime chief of the NIAID Laboratory of Immunoregulation, Dr. Fauci has made many seminal contributions in basic and clinical research and is one of the world's most cited biomedical scientists. He was one of the principal architects of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, a program that has saved millions of lives throughout the developing world. Most recently, he has led the U.S. government COVID-19 research effort and served on the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And on behalf of the Black Coalition Against COVID, Howard University, the Health Alliance Network, and BlackDoctor.org, and other organizations, we welcome you, Tony. How are you?
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Lane. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I look forward to the dialogue and the discussion. The comments that we heard from Dr. Frederick ring also true for those of us who are deeply involved in addressing this COVID-19 challenge that we're facing. And that is the very painful disparity, not only in incidence and prevalence of COVID-19 disease among African Americans and people of color, but also the disproportionate burden of serious disease as reflected in increased hospitalizations to the tune of 4 times the number of hospitalizations per 100,000 population among African Americans compared to the population in general, and at least twice as many deaths. These are things that relate to so many factors that I hope we get a chance to discuss this evening so that we could learn from you and do better in how we address so many of these difficult issues that are right now, I believe, at the forefront of what we are obligated to do with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll stop there and be happy to engage in discussion with you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for making time to really talk to and have a conversation with the Black community. And one thing that I have learned in terms of some poll taking, even though there is some trepidation of African Americans in terms of taking the vaccine or participating in vaccine trials, still African Americans do trust Dr. Fauci. And so that's actually a very good sign. So I want to start off by letting you know that a lot of African Americans do trust because you're very forthright based on science, and we try to follow the science. However, I do want to put some things into context as we start our conversation. A very recent Pew Research poll and other polls taken, so for example, blackdoctors.org also took a poll on their website, but they have indicated a reluctance by the Black community to participate in vaccine trials or to take the vaccine once it is available. The immediate question is around mistrust. Mistrust of the state, mistrust of white people, mistrust of the medical community, and so on. You generally hear of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and Henrietta Lacks, but it is rooted much deeper. From slavery to Jim Crow, to the targeting of Black leaders in the 60s, to police brutality and uneven court justice, to Black Lives Matter, and now to the disproportionate impact of COVID on the Black community. While at the same time, there is recognition of Black progress made in society, not just in arts, entertainment, and sports, but also in education, business, and science. The poll shows an almost even split between Black people who will take the vaccine and those that won't. And it cuts across economic position. In addition to all of those issues, all of the peeling back that layer of the onion, the whole country has been fed misinformation and sometimes outright lies about COVID-19 and vaccination. So my first question, which is a tough question, is why should Black people trust this process?
Well, Ambrose, I think the first thing that we need to appreciate, those of us who are trying to convince our African American brothers and sisters to trust the process, because it's ultimately to the benefit of the life and safety of the individuals as well as your families and your entire community, is that to first understand the reasons and empathize with the reasons for the mistrust, as opposed to pushing back against the mistrust. And one of the ways that I try to do it is to try and dissect out not the fundamental core of the distrust, but take the particular situation you're dealing with now and say, let's try and start off on an even footing. What are the reasons for this particular situation, namely the vaccine, that you have reluctance and skepticism about getting vaccinated? And I think there are two major issues that when I explain them to my friends and colleagues and people who I don't know in the African American community and the community of people of color, is that the speed with which this was done. Isn't there something reckless about that? Well, the first thing is to point out that the speed has nothing to do with compromising safety or scientific integrity. It's due to the extraordinary and exquisite advances in vaccine platform technology, which has allowed us to do things in weeks to months that formerly took years, several years, and to engage in a dialogue and talk about that as opposed to just feeding it to them. The second thing is, well, how do I know that this vaccine is really safe and is really effective? Is this just some government ploy? We've been fooled before by the federal government. You gave some very cogent instances just a moment ago. Well, or is it the pharmaceutical companies that want to get rich over us? Well, we can address both of those. First of all, the determination of whether a vaccine is truly safe and effective is not made by the company indirectly, and the government doesn't see the data at all until way down the process. The data first come to a totally independent data and safety monitoring board that is made up of experienced clinicians, scientists, vaccinologists, statisticians, and ethicists. They look at the data and they independently determine if it's safe and effective. If it is, they show it to the company. The company then analyzes it and presents it to the FDA and applies for an emergency use authorization or outright approval. The experienced career scientists, not the politicians, the career scientists in the FDA examine the data and then, in association with their own advisory committee, the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, or VRBPAC, those individuals then advise the FDA. When they then say that the vaccine is safe and effective, I will tell you all that I myself will be perfectly comfortable in taking the vaccine, and I would recommend it to my family. So it really is a process of trying to dissect out what the reasons for the skepticism are and to try and address them individually, fully respecting the underlying skepticism that you have every reason to have for historical reasons, to balance those two. That's how I would approach it.
So in that conversation, in what I mentioned earlier, is that there have been advances in society, including African Americans in science. And my understanding is that that independent monitoring board has African American scientists on it. In fact, one works with you directly. I don't know if she's on the board, but we know that we have an African American scientist that works with you directly. And so this is, and talk, you can speak about her work, but also how important that is in terms of breaking down these myths in the historic trepidation, because it's a new day. It's not 1930 anymore. This is 2000. This is 2020. And so the times have changed, and the input of African American scientists in this process is much deeper than one might think. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think the example that you gave, Ambrose, is an excellent example. The very vaccine, that's one of the two that has absolutely exquisite level, 94 to 95% efficacy against clinical disease and almost 100% efficacy against serious disease, that has shown to be clearly safe. That vaccine was actually developed in my institute's Vaccine Research Center by a team of scientists led by Dr. Barney Graham and his close colleague, Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, or Kizzy Corbett. Kizzy is an African-American scientist who is right at the forefront of the development of the vaccine. So the first thing you might want to say to my African-American brothers and sisters is that the vaccine that you're going to be taking was developed by an African-American woman. And that is just a fact. I mean, that is a fact. And I think that's some of the things that people don't fully appreciate.
Absolutely. And thank you for that information, because one of my residents, as a matter of fact, Mary Douglas Brown, who is 70 years old, lives in Ward 7 in Washington, D.C., had a question where she asked, number one, if I had COVID before, do I still get the vaccine? And let me just explain something. She's a breast cancer survivor, and she also has other health conditions, and is kind of worried about taking the vaccine. So number one, if she had COVID, does she take the vaccine still? And two, will it have an impact on some of the other issues of health that she has?
Well, the answer is, even if she's had COVID-19 disease, it is recommended that she does get the vaccine, for the simple reason it is not clear how long immunity to getting infected lasts. Typically, when you get infected, you're immune from reinfection for a period of time. It could be lifelong, like with measles. It could be 10 years or so, as with other diseases, or it could be relatively short. The history of coronaviruses indicates that the durability of immunity is a bit on the short side, measured like maybe in a year or two, and not in decades and decades. So that's the reason why we make no distinction. If a person gets infected and then wants to get the vaccine, it's perfectly fine. It doesn't have any negative impact on other underlying conditions. For example, like the woman who might be a breast cancer survivor.
That's good.
Ambrose, if I can jump in here, just as a follow-up question, Dr. Fauci, when people do get the vaccine, what is your anticipation in terms of their ability to return to work, to be out in the community? And what would be your expectation of them in terms of wearing masks, washing their hands, socially distancing until that recommendation goes away, so that people are clear about what type of a panacea and when that panacea is represented in taking a vaccine?
Well, that's a very good question, Dr. Frederick. So first of all, when you get vaccinated, it is very clear of the 30,000 people in the Moderna study and the 44,000 people in the Pfizer study, the incidence of severe adverse events is negligible. So we're not expecting any issues that would interfere with a person's going to work. What the vaccine does have commonly is what we call reactogenicity, which means that a substantial proportion of people will get a sore arm, maybe a bit of aches and feeling a little bit of malaise. A small percentage also gets fever, and that could be uncomfortable, but it's not a large percentage. All of that almost invariably disappears within 24 to 36 hours. So someone might feel a bit uncomfortable about going to work, but generally it doesn't interfere with your function. You take 2 Tylenol, and it really, for the most part, takes care of the ache and the feeling of malaise. The second question you asked is that until we get the level of infection in the community to such a low level that it is no longer a threat to anyone, in essence, almost eliminating the threat of infection, that even if you are vaccinated, it is recommended that you follow the public health recommendations of wearing a mask, staying distant, avoiding congregate settings and crowds, and washing your hands often, for a number of reasons. One, you may not be fully protected yourself. And two, the vaccine could prevent you from getting clinical disease, but not necessarily protect you against getting infected. So you could get infected and have absolutely no symptoms, but you might have virus in your nasopharynx, even though you don't have any symptoms. So you want to make sure that you do something like wear a mask, like keep your distance, so you don't inadvertently infect someone else.
Why is there a need for a second dose, booster dose, to make the vaccine effective?
That's just the way the immune system responds. We know from practice and experience that with some types of vaccines, you require a prime, which gets all of those immune cells sort of triggered and ready. Then you come in with a boost, and the response really takes off. So based on considerable experience, we know that a prime followed in 28 days by a boost gives you a much more potent and durable response than just a single injection.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you something. I'm not reassured from what Dr. Fauci said. You can always tell me how you feel in the comment section. The problem with America and this medical industry and the government is you've done a lot of heinous things medically to the Black community. And we know you don't give us the same kind of health care that you give others, but you have this expectation of us trusting you without even trying to make amends with the Black community. What have you done to take the negative and make something positive out of it? You do nothing. You have high expectations, but you do nothing. And that's the problem. You do nothing to remedy the wealth gap. You do nothing to remedy all of the mass incarceration of innocent people, jailing people for marijuana, and even things all throughout history with the medical community. You do nothing to remedy these situations. But we're supposed to blindly look past all of that and continue to trust you. Well, that's not even realistic for you to believe that. That's why it's not happening. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. Even after listening to Dr. Fauci, I still don't trust this medical community. I still don't trust their vaccine. I still don't trust anything these folks say. But you can tell me what you think in the comment section. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.